I'm your host, Scott Norton, and welcome to At Large. On this show, I talk to world-class creatives who use business to bring their ideas to life. We'll hear about their creative practices, their most interesting stories, and the lessons that'll inspire you the way that they've inspired me. A few weeks ago, I picked up a book called Blank Space, A Cultural History of the 21st Century. I couldn't put it down. I found myself waking up in the middle of the night just to keep reading. Today on At Large, I'm joined by its author, W. David Marx. He's a cultural critic, historian, and decoder of the hidden forces shaping our lives. From abandoned shopping malls to algorithmically optimized pop songs celebrated by fan armies, Marx traces how a blank space of repetition has quietly become the default setting for cultural production in the internet era. His argument is bold. Culture is increasingly mediated by financial institutions and technology platforms, often at the expense of outsider creativity and true originality. David spent 13 years at Google's Japan office. He wrote his Harvard thesis on Bape, and now he's on the board of Nigo's human-made clothing label, which just went public on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Blank Space is his third book, and now I can't wait to read his fourth. I present to you W. David Marx, At Large. Mr. W. David Marx, joining us from Tokyo.
Hello. Thanks for having me. Last time we sat together, we were having 5 cups of coffee in a row.
That's right, at a coffee omakase in a secret location in either Harajuku or Jingumai or something like that.
That's right.
I'm really excited for today because this is the first time on At Large that we've ever done what I'm calling a book club show. And normally I talk to creative people primarily about their craft and about how they approach business and sometimes entrepreneurship. And for this show, we're going to do something a little bit different because you have a real subject matter expertise. And so I really want to talk about this book. And then secondarily, we can talk about your craft and how you went about writing it. Why don't we start with, the book is called Blank Space, A Cultural History of the 21st Century. What is the book about? What's the big idea?
So there had not really been a good cultural history of the 21st century, beginning with there was no real history of the aughts that there was in the 20th century of like a history of the 60s or history of the 50s or the 70s. And so I always thought that was curious. And it was somewhat because the whole decade started to feel like a blur, and I don't think people got out of it feeling like, wow, that was a very clear 10 years in which major changes had happened. As you got to the teens, it happened again, and I'm using the word teens as if that's a word people use, but there's not even really a term for the 2010s. That's how little people saw it as a decade itself. And so then at the 25-year mark, it felt like, well, at least we could stop and see how culture has changed over those 25 years. And so the primary purpose of the book is just to be a cultural history of 2001 to 2025 and try to trace the major changes in popular culture and where they came from. At the same time, I had read in preparation for this David Halberstam's The 50s, which is this giant doorstop of a book, and it has no chapter titles. And as you read, it's like, I guess this chapter is about Marilyn Monroe, or I guess this chapter is about Castro, but it really doesn't have any kind of central thesis about what the 50s meant. It's just a bunch of episodes. So I also wanted to make sure the reader had a sense of these are the changes you will be tracking. And so it does have a central thesis, more or less, that these 25 years represent a real flourishing of culture as entertainment, distraction, as profiteering, and as politics. But the thing that culture often did, and the culture that we remember and the culture we use for historical marking, tends to be more artistic or radically inventive culture. It doesn't necessarily have to be artistic, but subcultures and countercultures and things that are radical breaks from the past. Yes. And we use those to, mark time, but also take inspiration and see the world in different ways. And so I think the number one thing I would say about these 25 years is there have been a lot of very small micro changes, and there have been these very sweeping macro changes about what culture means in terms of economy and society, but that middle zone of creative invention has been weaker. It's not that it's completely absent, but it's just been weaker than the last 25 years or most of the 20th century, and that's really what the book adds up to. But even if you don't necessarily believe that thesis, I think the book just provides a timeline of what happened and who was influencing who and where I think a lot of these changes came from.
You definitely overlay your own kind of editorial critiques on the period. Mm-hmm. You have a very strong point of view in this book. And there is a certain, I would say, critique or pessimism about this progress of 25-year time, and I think like where culture is going. And that makes it, I would say, markedly different from a normal historical, just series of annals or story. And I really want to get into that because that's what really struck me as so interesting about this. And on this show, on this podcast, we deal on every episode with art and commerce together. Mm-hmm. And, we've spent a little bit of time together, and you probably get the accurate sense that I take a fairly optimistic view. I'm just like an optimistic person in general. And, I believe that there's this path where you can stay true to what you're doing from a craft perspective and a self-expression perspective and make that economically viable by linking that to a business model. And in some ways, your book puts that assumption under the microscope and finds kind of where that idea has been taken too far, or maybe ratcheted up to the point where financial institutions and technology institutions have essentially co-opted and alloyed the cultural production and society. And so this worldview that I have, right, that it's possible, is this a naive view, or is this an attitude that you share and that you believe in too?
I mean, it's interesting because the book is described as pessimistic just because I'm in some ways over-focused on negative things. The defense I would give is if you were to step back and say, who were the transformative people of this period? And you did not mention Kim Kardashian. You did not mention Kanye West. You did not mention Paris Hilton or Donald Trump. It would not be a book at all. And so you have to focus on these people. And I think over-focusing on them is not an insane editorial choice. I actually don't think we disagree. And I think the one thing I would say is you just said, did they go too far? And I think that's what really the question is there's one thing to say, I'm really focused on craft, I'm focused on business. I'm focused on craft, focused on art, focused on making a difference in this world. How do I negotiate the economic and business aspects of that? Versus the goal is to do something lowest common denominator to get attention. And then once I have attention, to then make more lowest common denominator products or get a giant sponsorship or make money, or the degree to which now celebrities feel like they haven't achieved anything until they turn their celebrity into some sort of entrepreneurial success. And the sense that entrepreneurialism itself is now equated with artistic genius.
Yes.
And I think that's really in one way, what I'm objectively observing that I think this happened, and I think it's hard to deny it didn't. And then on a more moralistic or normative side, saying, is that really what we want to organize society for?
Yes. Beautifully said. And it reminds me, you talk a lot about Jimmy Iovine in the book. Like he comes up multiple times and you kind of treat him a little bit like a piñata. But he has a story about working with Bruce Springsteen, many decades ago, and how Bruce told him, I don't care about being rich. I don't even care about being famous. I care about being great. Mm-hmm. And Jimmy Iovine has said recently that fame has replaced great. Mm-hmm. Right? Fame is the predecessor to getting opportunities, to being cast in movies, to getting the record deal, more so than great is. And it's that quote and that recognition is, I think, what you are critiquing in this book, or at least one of the things that you're critiquing in this book.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. So Jimmy Iovine shows up in the book as like kind of a recurring character, and that was intentional because I realized from the very beginning he was behind the scenes of a lot of this stuff. But there's a famous story. This is told kind of third hand through Tyler, the creator. Tyler heard this from Pharrell, and I couldn't trace when this happened. But Iovine was a big backer of Pharrell early, gave him Star Trek records. Mm-hmm. But he said to Pharrell, do you like house music? And Pharrell's like, yeah, I like house music, like good tempo, good vibe. And Iovine's like, no, music that will buy you a house. And it's very clear that Iovine, if you kind of look at all of his interactions with artists, including Springsteen and Tom Petty, he was always on the side of, no, we're going more commercial. And what's so funny about, going back to Lady Gaga and Blurred Lines and all these songs that he has a hand in, there's always a Beats commercial version of the same video. Yes. And so take that for a second and say, okay, so Iovine's not doing anything maybe that different from a 20th century music mogul. So there's been other people, Clive Davis or whatever. There's this whole list of people like that. The difference is there was a documentary that I think it was HBO made called The Defiant Ones.
That's right.
Which is about the partnership of Jimmy Iovine and Dr. Dre. And Dr. Dre is an artist at the end of the day. And he was kind of brought into Beats, which was Jimmy Iovine's idea for this piece of hardware that obviously went very successfully and was acquired by Apple. But the documentary ultimately treats these two people as equals. And so the businessman on one side and the artist on the other side are now equal in this partnership, and they're both defiant ones. I mean, and it's a reference to an old movie, I believe, about like a black and white soldier. So there's some kind of racial component to the titling as well. But it just struck me that this is an entire documentary about Iovine being the defiant one, but the defiance is all, you told me I couldn't turn Marilyn Manson into a business, and now I've showed you that I can. Or, right. Trent Reznor doesn't want to sign with me, but I'm going to, get him into a room until we finally hammer out a deal. And so that movie really does make him a hero as an entrepreneur businessman. But if you watch what he's always doing with the artists, it was always pushing them to commercialize more. And maybe you can argue that that's good for making, Lady Gaga only makes sense as Lady Gaga as a huge star. Like, I get that. Or Gwen Stefani needed a little bit of push to become, no doubt to become as big as they did, but then also to take their fame and use it as a vehicle to commercialize their own Beats headphones, which they put in every video.
What is Poptimism?
It is a very controversial term. I mean, it had appeared in the UK music press in the 80s to describe some indie bands who were toying aesthetically with pop aesthetics to kind of be cheeky. Poptimism kind of morphs out of just this critical debate, and it becomes a way to describe an ethos that's just taken over people's valuation of pop culture, which is, I would describe as, there's something noble in popularity because it reflects a democratic acceptance that more people like it, and so it must be good. That there's something about pop and its union with commerce that's good about music, that it's fun, that the artifice, the fakeness, the auto-tune vocals, the lip syncing, all of that is kind of a virtue rather than a vice. Yep. And then also a general sense of, when you criticize a piece of pop culture, you're really disrespecting the other person who likes that piece of pop culture. So you need to be very sensitive about how much you're criticizing, especially popular artists. And so to go out and say that Ashlee Simpson is a worse artist because she was caught lip syncing, there's something disrespectful about that to Ashlee Simpson fans. The irony, of course, that the Ashlee Simpson fans were quite upset that she was lip syncing, but put that aside. And now a band like Geese has popped up who really embody a lot of this old indie rock aesthetic. I think they're an incredibly good band. I think the last two albums are masterpieces.
I'll check them out.
But they're so controversial because there's a sense of, no, you can't go back to indie rock being a thing. So it's not necessarily that we live in a pluralistic world where rock music and pop music all should be considered the same quality. There's actually a sense that the vital music is the Justin Bieber and the Taylor Swift. It can't go back to a small ban because that would be elitist.
So I never knew this word poptimism, but I've felt, as both a cultural observer and also a brand builder over the last 15 years. And like a brand builder based on a form of self-expression and what I find of like genuine personal love, passion, authenticity is I think that this poptimism and this concept of fame has replaced great. They have a lot in common and they're kind of woven together because I see a lot of celebrity-driven businesses or creator-driven businesses that I see as kind of like cash grabs. And I assume, surely people are going to see through this. And then people end up embracing it and celebrating it.
Yes.
And there's a whole, media industrial complex around, well, if we write about the celebrity, that's going to get more clicks and we're going to get more visibility and sell more ads. Right. And it's this self-fulfilling prophecy where I'm kind of sitting here like, people like, this is not the thing,
Right.
And I'm kind of surprised how long these things can go on. And so it was edifying for me to read about poptimism and put this word around it. Can I make
go
ahead.
a
Absolutely.
point there? So, I grew up in the 90s. The idea of having your iconic alternative song be used by a giant manufacturer or retailer for a commercial was taboo. And as record sales went down, it made perfect sense to say, well, that's too strict on the artist, that they should be able to make money somewhere. And if Target wants to pay them $300,000 to use an Apples and Stereo song or whatever in a commercial, like Apples and Stereo should just take the money because they're not going to see it through album sales or even touring. That now we flash forward, and as you said, that artists are doing what are cash grabs in the sense that Ryan Reynolds is not a technician of mobile technology. He's just a face and an investor in Mint Mobile. So him doing Mint Mobile is not giving his gift to the world. It's right. Just simply, leveraging one's own success to find new money-making opportunities. But what this book really is about is how those values shifted. Because as you said, and this is what's interesting to me, is not that they're doing it, because there's always greedy people. It's the, number one, their own self-justifications for it are based on some sort of ideology and that they believe they're doing a good thing. And then their fans believe that something good is happening. And so I think that is the real shift. It's not that people have always sold out. It's the acceptance of it under these values that used to be the values that would be against it.
And what is the omnivore monoculture?
So that is a term I actually did coin. So
congratulations.
It's incredibly annoying. But so omnivoreism is not something I coined. Omnivoreism is this concept that begins, I think, in academics in the 90s, which is there used to be a real social stratification in terms of cultural consumption. And so you had high culture that wealthy people consumed. Not all wealthy people, but educated wealthy people. You had middle brow culture that was for college-educated upper middle class people, professional class people, more or less. And then you had low culture, which is for everyone else. There is then, in the 90s, kind of post-yuppie culture in the 80s was very much about this cosmopolitan embrace of things around the world, but they were all high-end and sophisticated. Post-yuppie culture, there just gets a sense that to be really culturally literate, you also have to enjoy low culture, middle culture, high culture, everything. So you're an omnivore of cultural experiences to be very cultured and sophisticated. And so that makes a lot of sense. And for a long time, and I think this is something really important I don't want mistaken, omnivoreism, the idea that you're just curious about everything in culture, was a incredibly good engine for creativity. And so if
that's how I self-identify.
Yeah, and I generally agree with this, which is just that not only if you're a hip hop artist and you start getting into Fiona Apple or and this is kind of a Kanye West reference, but getting into Fiona Apple and taking those influences and then getting into French fashion houses and taking those influences, putting it all together, and getting into Daft Punk, putting that all together, it did create new forms of music and art and culture. And so that was really successful. At some point, there was really nothing left. There was no bridge. There was no walls anymore between any of these genres, other than there was this big omnivore, sophisticated thing in the middle that after Kim Kardashian had really absorbed even reality TV into it and high fashion. The only thing that was really left is that hip hop and country hated each other because they were just different fans. And in some ways, country music is based on this anti-cosmopolitan taste that every song is, can't try this. And, you wouldn't try
Don't
that
try
in
this in a small town.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's like these very, and people get mad if you call them provincial, but they're anti-cosmopolitan tastes. It intentionally identity based off we're not these people on the coast. And so that music obviously hated hip hop. And when Old Town Road came out by Lil Nas X, suddenly you had a hip hop artist doing country. It was on the country charts, and then they kicked it off the country charts. And then, okay, great, we're going to get Billy Ray Cyrus to come in and bring it back on the country charts. And at that point, you really don't have any divisions anymore in any genre that is popular. You can mix and match from everywhere. And then you have Shabuzi, who has like the biggest song last year, more or less, that's just a country hip hop song. And it's hard to tell which... It's not even like you feel the fusion, like that's crazy that they're doing it. It's just a pop song. So the problem is, once you get to that point, you're in a monoculture because there's no more tension anymore about the fusion itself. The fusion used to be irregular and strange, and that's where the creativity came in. But now if you can fuse everything, if everything goes, then nothing means that much anymore to be fused together. And so it does feel that the rule is, as long as it's glossy and well marketed, it can kind of be anything. And so it does feel like this monoculture of the same people over and over again, even if the influences, what Bad Bunny is doing, what Taylor Swift doing are kind of different on one level, but it's all in the melange at this point so much that you don't feel any tension. The way that if you're old enough, there was a Judgment Night soundtrack that came out, I think, 92, 93, where it's like we put a bunch of hip-hop artists together with a bunch of rock artists, and they made a song, and that's insane that rap and rock could come together like that. I mean, that was a big deal, and now it's like, obviously, who cares? There's just almost nothing you could do.
Right, yeah. And I do remember, of course, cross-pollination is a very important part of creative culture, whether it was like the DJ Danger Mouse album, right, the Grey album of Beatles and Jay-Z. Or I remember there was this phase for 2 years where David Guetta was basically producing every hip hop song. And it was like Euro trance that was layered onto rap. But what you're talking about is there's the downside to it is that when you think about populations and society, belonging is the flip side of inclusion, right? Mm-hmm. And so before there was a certain belonging because it was like, do you remember those first albums that The Weeknd released in like 2011, like 2010, 2011? They were like free online. And it was when The Weeknd was underground. I recently checked and The Weeknd is now the #1 streaming artist on Spotify in terms of numbers of streams this year. But at the time it was like this really kind of like minor key, left field, spoken word hip hop. And there was a certain exclusionariness to that, right? Like it felt very kind of like downtown or that people don't know about it. And now what you're talking about with the omnivore monoculture, it's not necessarily that cross-pollination is a bad thing, but it's things that get fed in this mainstream river of pop culture, and they're not for any specific audience. Which in a way, to me, make them kind of boring because it's not just about the music, it's about the social organism connected to the music.
Absolutely. And look, I deal with this really extensively in my second book, Status and Culture, if people are interested in learning more. But the issue with culture in general, and the thing that we have a hard time accepting, is that when you listen to a song by The Weeknd, we want it to be a good song just because the song is good. There's something inherent and intrinsic about the song being good. But unfortunately, all of our aesthetic judgments are done within some sort of broader context. It's just that's the way the human mind works. And the stimulus that we take from something is based off the stimulus that we've had before. And so there is something that changes the way we enjoy culture if we know this is something that boosts our identity or connects us to a group, or not everybody knows. Whatever social context, positive social context, it makes the music sound better. It just does.
Yes.
Like that's the way our brains work. There's an old experiment where they give people wine and they say this one's cheap and this one's expensive. Which one do you think is better? And people always say that the expensive one tastes better, even though it's the same wine in the same cup, right? And so then they did it with like people's brains in an MRI, and what they found is that they're not lying in the sense they're not trying to impress you by saying that they like the expensive wine. Their brain is registering the wine that's more expensive in a different way than it is the cheap wine. I do believe that there are different things operating in art, and that you can have culture that is lowest common denominator in the sense that it is immediately enjoyable and recognizable to as many people as possible because it's based off of formulas that they already know. Or you can have creative works that change the formulas, in a way that make us understand that there was a formula to start with, and that creates new kinds of stimulus. So those acts, you can say, both are valuable. If I go to McDonald's and get a Big Mac and it's going to taste the same around the world, that could be valuable. I can see why someone thinks that is good. But if somebody does some sort of reinvents the burger in a way that makes me say, wow, that's really what a burger was about. I mean, I think this is a really pretentious, maybe impossible example, but the point is that is just a different thing going on than making the standardized thing. So you can say there's value in both. It's just that ultimately they're different. And before we get into the elitism of one being better than the other, can we recognize there's difference? And then the second is that ultimately the formula that is used for pop culture and mass culture, the thing that everyone enjoys, is always parasitic on some sort of innovation from the past. Somebody did something bold and different. Hip-hop being a great example. Hip-hop invented on the margins of society by some rebellious people. Now it is the thing that powers billions of people's pleasure from culture every day. So if you do not have those innovations, the entire system becomes stale. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. And so it is not elitist to say, I want everyone to have refreshed, incredible experiences, but that requires some group to actually go do the hard work.
Yeah, completely agree. And the book, which starts really in 2001, it really accelerates into a crescendo over the last 5 years of cultural production and these cultural cycles repeating themselves and collapsing in on themselves, and the news cycle and the meme cycle moving so much more quickly. And that, I think, is a perfect transition into what I think this book is actually really about, which is the internet. And tell me, in writing this book, how have you thought about how the internet has changed incentives and changed culture?
So there's a period of the internet where the internet is flourishing for upper middle class taste, or flourishing.
And you call it the nerd internet.
The nerd internet, yeah.
And so when I'm talking about the internet, I mean, of course the internet has changed, and this book is in a lot of ways, it shows how the changing internet has changed culture, and I think why the past 5 years have felt like this crescendo of atrophy. So how have incentives been changed by the internet since the introduction of Web 2.0, social media, and call it UGC?
Yeah, and so I think that is the big shift. So it starts post-smartphone, in that suddenly you're unchained from a desktop. I mean, I can't even imagine, but you used to check your internet and then go out and have a day without the internet.
That's right.
And then come
back. You could be away from the internet. That was you could be away from the internet. Yeah.
That was a crazy thing. So obviously putting a content creation device in the hand of every single person on earth is going to create more content, and that everyone's going to think of themselves as a content creator, that these platforms make it where, and Taylor Lorenz has I'm stealing this point from her, but is making everyone think of themselves, even if they're not a content creator, in terms of metrics. I'm a 750 follower person, based on Instagram or whatever.
You call it quantified validation culture.
Yeah.
In your book. Is that you can look at anyone and be like, how many Instagram followers do they have?
In Status and Culture, I talk less about the individuals and choices and more about the system effects of this. The other system effect is so much of 90s culture, and what made it cool was that you had to know a guy to know about it. I knew the band Dinosaur Jr. because my friend Tim's older brother Mark was like, oh, you like Teenage Fan Club? You got to hear this, and gave me a Dinosaur Jr. CD. Had he not done that, I probably would have never heard them, or it would have taken a while. It was hard to get stuff, and that drove a lot of value. And so the problem is the internet makes all information not only more or less available, but it makes it seem like it's available. So the information costs, even if they're high, seem like they're cheap. So if someone's like, I know this thing you don't, it's like, well, just, who cares? Anybody can know anything. And then it makes products all available. So that really drives the only objective measures become money and price and things like that. So I think I cover that more in Status and Culture. So then you have all that. Then, of course, you have the main way that content creation is funded is through an advertising format that is so precise that there's no more guessing. So that used to be more or less the content is funded because like we think you're cool. We don't know how many people that you reach. Your magazine, you say you reach 50,000 circulation, which is some fake number. We're just going to give you a bunch of money, like go make a cool magazine. Now it's like we don't have to pay you anything until you serve us the clicks and the impressions or whatever the metric is. So then that flips on its head, which is you can't just do a cool piece of content and convince Nike that it was worth it. Nike wants to see the clicks. And so that obviously changes the entire formula for the content that rises up. And then it changes the incentive structure for everyone making culture, which is like, if you're going to be on YouTube making videos, you want videos that get seen, get clicks, give you revenue, all of these things. And then the young people, then you put these all together. So a young person who's coming on the internet for the first time in the 2010s now has the tools to make videos unlike ever before in the history of the world, has the means to distribute them to everyone in the world. Those are good things. They're going online because they saw Bethany Moda do videos where she's showing off her Forever 21 hauls of like, here's the stuff I bought. And said, I could do that. Not, I saw David Lynch or I saw this obscure artist do something with video, I'm going to make video. They're going to become a creator in the first place because they see it as a business and fame opportunity. Right. And then they're going to keep tweaking the videos to be more and more, even this is before even, deep algorithms, just to be more popular because popularity is what gets them paid and what gets them validation. So it all snowballs into where we are now. And the thing I worry about is, again, in my optimistic belief is the resistance is always possible and that we'll chase value away in the sense of if everything is Mr. Beast and everything is Mr. Beast burger, then people say, I'm just going to go have a salad and read a book or something, right? You can always move away from it. But the difference is that this quantification makes it that if you create a really strange TikTok channel that's only weird TikToks that are artistic, let's say this is kind of even possible, and they all have 200 views, then you're just nobody. No one's going to see it. Nobody cares. And if someone does see it, they're going to say, this couldn't possibly matter because it's so low level quantities of views.
Right. I mean, there's so much of what in what you just shared. And an excerpt from your book, a line that you said was, meanwhile, Instagram's quantification of fame and follower counts and engagement, number of likes, comments, and reposts, created a veneer of objectivity for tracking fame and new avenues for deceit. And have you ever read How to Succeed in Mr. Beast's production?
No.
So Mr. Beast wrote a Google Doc that is very good, very raw. There's like typos in it, which is basically how to succeed in his enterprise. And you can clearly see from that his craft isn't storytelling. His craft is not self-expression. His craft is everything is in service of watch time, quantified watch time, and optimization of thumbnails for YouTube. He's like, that's the craft. And which is such a different way of thinking of the kind of 90s filmmaker, right? Like you have this other quote, "Before the internet, the stereotype of an aspiring filmmaker was someone with artistic pretensions represented in the scrappy outsider ethos of 90s indie auteurs such as Richard Linklater, Spike Lee, and Quentin Tarantino. Once tech platforms started paying for views, this incentivized a new type of creator who simply talked into their camera and constantly honed their content to attract the broadest possible audience."
Yes.
And so this is, it speaks for itself, but I think this is how the internet is changing culture and why we are now living truly in the Andy Warhol 15 minutes of fame that he predicted, between the bed intruder, hide your kids, hide your wife video that you highlight, Hawk Tuah, the Chinese glycine factory, the Pope puffer jacket, right? Yep. Made by a guy with AI when he was high on mushrooms. And I think that the other thing which you don't talk about is the proliferation of Microsoft Excel, because when we gave everyone in business computers, yep, you could, as a record executive or as a film executive, previously say, I like this, and we don't have any other evidence to say that it won't work, so let's put it out there. And now it's all, well, let's take your past numbers and project them forward into our future numbers. Yes. And therefore, we end up with music that sounds like the music before, and we end up with films that are simply the sequels to other IP, right? And other films.
And at the end of the book, I have this point of, if you want to restore culture, don't look at the data. The data is always the past. It's never the future.
What do you think it is about human nature that has put us in this direction? Is there a nefarious force that is guiding the process moving towards this quote unquote blank space of culture? Or is this what people actually want?
So I look at structures. I guess I'm trying to figure out like what my methodology is for any of this research and analysis, which is I like to look at structures and how they're connected. And I have always been weary. As a kid, I loved conspiracy theories, and I think that I got through that period of my life quickly, and then started to become almost anti-conspiracy theory. And I think the most radical thing I believe is that Oswald acted alone in murdering Kennedy or whatever. But I think that so much of things that look like there is a conspiracy is actually invisible hand, and invisible hand means in this context that everyone is pursuing what they believe is best for them, and then there's some system effect that's unintended that comes out of that. And so
that's right.
Someone is like, is this nefarious? Is this all kind of a plot of capitalism, as if capitalism is like this boardroom somewhere? I think in the book I show what everyone's incentive is, and
yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah, and the truth is that a lot of people think they're doing the right thing. I think Zuckerberg still in his heart believes that all these things are good for some reason. And but a normal user of TikTok, they are getting the thing they want out of it, which is just to be entertained and distracted, and that's it. I mean, it could be that simple. It doesn't have to be. Now the question is, I mean, if you're hungry and you eat. And this is maybe the elitist part of it, or the part that's just unfortunate with humans, is that if you are hungry and you go to a cookie and you have a bunch of cookies, and like I used to open a pack of Oreos and eat 12 Oreos in a row or something, and you're like, great, those were incredible Oreos, and then maybe 30 minutes later I feel terrible that I just ate all these Oreos, and then obviously the effect on my body over time is bad. But in that moment, it is the thing that I want to eat those Oreos.
That's right.
So of course, like, these things work because they're optimized to deliver the thing that people want in that moment.
Let's talk about a few things that I'm surprised you didn't talk about in the book. And as you know, I come from the world of food, and you talked shockingly little about food, given its centerpiece in culture. You talk a ton about music. Music is, of course, an important centerpiece of culture. But I want to talk through a few things that happened in the food world during this time. And one of the things that was very consequential for our business, but also for, I think anyone could witness this, was keto and paleo was the first ever rise of a internet native diet. And you saw... It was in 2000, you could say this about a lot of different disciplines, but in 2010, cookbook authors were starting Instagram accounts. And then in 2020, Instagram food people were the only ones writing cookbooks, right? And everything switched. And there was this, very interesting kind of intersection of health and wellness and food and culinary. At the time, it was kind of like slop. Like people were making like bacon wrapped grilled avocados and just absolutely like overdosing on saturated fat and protein. And luckily that has gotten, I think, in contrast to the world of kind of music and video that you critique, if anything, the internet now is in an amazing place when it comes to chef creators and food, and the taste level has actually gone way up. The production of it is beautiful. There's a lot of very interesting kind of like niche dishes, which are kind of making their way around the world. But I thought that was really interesting because that sort of keto and paleo movement, which was a somewhat like pseudoscientific self-improvement mechanism tied to food, then turned into the world of the seed oil truthers and the carnivore diet and sort of birthed these many different online kind of wellness and food-based phenomena, which I thought was really interesting. I don't know if did you observe anything in the food culture world or anything, in 2010s?
Okay, you're the first person to mention this, and there were things I knew I was not talking about enough, like books and video games.
Oh gosh,
food,
yeah, video games. Food, I don't have that on my list, but damn.
Food, I'm embarrassed that's not in the book more because I 100% agree with everything you said.
If you want to write a sequel, I'm here.
I really believe that media itself, when it became free, lost some value. And, so in the early 2000s, it no longer meant as much to own a CD.
But food never became free.
Exactly. So food, and so I think clothing and food are these tactile experiences. And food in particular photographs incredibly well. And restaurants, this really has been pointed out in the last 5 years, but restaurant reservations became a new status symbol because they're still ultimately finite in supply. That everybody can listen to the Taylor Swift album, but not everybody can go to Noma. I think that The Bear as a TV show and a phenomenon is incredible in that they've took this food culture and they turned it into entertainment and introduced a lot of people to the specific chefs themselves. So, I mean, food, I think, has had an incredible run of 25 years. In Tokyo, one of the downsides is that it used to be really easy just to walk into any restaurant, and now everyone knows everywhere good, and so you can't go anywhere anymore, or you have to wait in line for hours. So there's really some negative effects to some of this as well. But I would say where music taste level has probably gone down, and probably literature, some of these forms that used to have a little bit more abutting against really getting people to try out more difficult things has been for so many fields has gone away. But for food, people are just eating better. They're being more adventurous. Now there's of course like all the premium mediocre categories as well, but like coffee. Yeah. And then if you think about coffee, I mean, just the degree to which, an espresso was a huge deal 30 years ago. Like there's this thing called an espresso, and now the degree I can go have, even in Paris, where the coffee's not great, but if you go to a third wave coffee place, this is a Burundi, single origin, and it's incredible. Or the drip coffee that you can get in Japan is just unbelievable. And the fact that Blue Bottle has taken that globally. So, I completely agree that food, I would say food and fashion are two areas where it does feel like there's just more choice and better choice and higher consumer sophistication. And that is a positive overall. And if there are negative consequences, I think that, everything has negative consequences.
Yeah, we could talk about, there are some negative consequences there, but largely it's actually been aided by the internet. The other thing that you don't talk about, and I'm not a sports guy, but you don't talk about sports. And you might be thinking, well, what changed about sports in this period? But the rise of ultimate fighting and MMA took place during this time. So during 2001 and the early 2000s, MMA was this super fringe thing that was like illegal in a bunch of states. And now, I mean, MMA, UFC, TKO, which is the parent company, a multi-billion-dollar business, right? One of the great successes, Dana White is on Zuckerberg's board, right?
Yep.
And is spending time with the president of the United States. Joe Rogan is in some ways, which we'll get to, like just this incredibly important, relevant character that came from this world of MMA. And that's another thing that is, for me, I group that within Poptimism because I look at this and I'm like, this is so uncouth. It's so lowbrow. It's like, it's just, we're supposed to be moving away from this as a society and as a culture, not towards this. And I'm just shocked with every passing month. It's so much more celebrated, huge corporate sponsors. It's on at bars and restaurants. Like when people are eating, I'm like blown away by it. And like I said, I am a huge snob, right? Like I'm a highbrow snob who's out of touch. But MMA and UFC, I think is very much part of this Poptimism ethos, and reminds me too of. Do you listen to the podcast Search Engine?
No.
There's a great episode which it'll be in the show notes. I've talked about before, called the Dubai Chocolate Theory of the Internet, which is specifically about how Chinese social media and TikTok is different than YouTube and Instagram and Snapchat because it's not narrative based; it's pure stimulation. And what Dubai Chocolate is like the thing that made Dubai Chocolate go viral was this video, you know, a mukbang video, basically an eating video of pure stimulation. And in some ways, like MMA and UFC are very much aligned with that Dubai Chocolate Theory of the Internet of just pure stimulation, right? Like how intense can we get? How raw can we get? And so I group it within this Poptimism because to me it is like lowbrow, no brow, and it's also celebrated as this like legitimate form of competition and culture.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, and I think about sports quite a lot in its context of culture, because obviously people take from sports what I would take from fandom of music or books or other things. Between that and the more that sports takes over, the more also I think people see pop culture as sports, that they want their artist to win over the other artists. And I talk about that in the book, and I do think Poptimism looks at the cultural field and says there's major leagues and minor leagues, and we really only need to talk about the major leagues. The minor leagues don't matter because in sports they don't matter. That maybe you'll see some rising star, but they really are important when they get to the majors. The minor leagues are not covered, but that's not how culture works, which is the minor leagues are always where the innovation is. Yes. And then it somehow you hope that they reach the majors. And so I think the sports mindset is definitely something I do talk about a tiny bit in the book. But I agree with all that. And then the other part is the gambling part, which is just that everything is now gambling.
Everything is a casino now. You
can bet on a sports match, obviously, but then you can bet on, whether, Trump is going to get impeached or, all sorts of obscure social actions as well.
Right. And that could be its own episode. That could be its own book, which is about economic precarity and the fall of traditional career. But that's another topic. Tell me about the Zynternet and the counterculture.
So the Zynternet is a term Max Reed came up with, so give him credit for that. I think it was a very smart way to describe that on the right, there's a whole panoply of different anti-liberal movements. And on the far, far right, you have actual groypers, Nazis, 4chan trolls. And then you have the manosphere that maybe sometimes gets directly political, but it's much more just about men's dominance over women. But then there's, I think the largest segment, it's not particularly political and it's not particularly openly misogynistic. It's what Max Reed calls the Zynternet, what's also called sometimes, barstool conservatism, but just a general feeling that they're not welcome in liberal cosmopolitan society, and the tastes that they have are not reflected in the culture. But it's sports betting and OnlyFans and video games and just this kind of very hermetically sealed world in which bros are bros. And I think that Trump's political victory at a certain level was to bring together those disparate wings. And it's really important to make sure that the Zynternet isn't groypers. I think they're different. But they bring them all together in a general sense of we need to take the country back from liberal cosmopolitanism. But those are also the kind of people that Trump's probably losing in terms of support because they were ideologically never that aligned with him. It was just kind of more an aesthetic alignment.
That's right, aesthetic alignment. And on that aesthetic alignment, Trump, I see as someone who, why I'm fascinated with Trump is that for him, the promotion of the product is indistinguishable from the product, which is basically what the reality of internet fame is, right? Is where the promotion of the product is indistinguishable from the product itself. That is the idea of an Instagram post itself, which is an image that gets the likes. And Trump is someone that thrives in the blank space because his core skills is that promotion. And that is relevant to the Zynternet.
I mean, the one thing I would say is I don't know, there used to be this term polite society. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there is this in the United States.
Nice guys finish last, right? Yeah, if you're talking about polite society, nice guys finish last. That's the reality. I
just don't think there is a voting bloc that I would describe as kind of we uphold manners and decorum.
That's what 2016 taught us.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what so many people were shocked by.
The lesson was, well, Trump obviously can't be president because he's the worst human being in America, so that's not going to happen. And
exactly.
Then, well, he won. Okay, well, then it must be a fluke. It must be the Russians. And then 2022 is like, no, there just isn't a constituency of vote. We can't let the worst human being in America be president. That people do not see it that way. They say, you can have, I will give up democracy. I will give up decorum. I'll give up everything if I can get like a 5% increase in income. That's the trade-off. And so if money is everything and we have no social norms or values, well, politics obviously can't operate the way it used to. And the transgressiveness that used to power the left was just borrowed by the right and is in some ways more successful there.
I think that the Trump phenomenon is a little bit more complicated than it's going to make me 5% more wealthy.
Yeah.
Because I think people see him as someone who is free. And very few people actually feel free. And so he is this aspirational avatar of someone who the rules don't apply to. And I think having the rules not apply to you is an incredibly intoxicating idea. That's, I think, the psychology that is behind his popularity.
Yeah, and just to clarify, because I was very, very obscure there, his fans are most certainly that. And his diehard supporters want their enemies to be punished, and he is an incredible avatar for that as well. But there's that middle ground who aren't Trump people, but who voted for him and that pushed him over the top. And I would say that there was just a very practical trade-off. I want prices down. I want incomes up. This guy knows business. Let's let him go. And go do that, and maybe the lack of decorum will mean he can get around some of these barriers, et cetera, et cetera. But there's just not a decorum faction in American society or politics at the moment.
Flipping the coin to a more positive note, what current artists from any medium makes you question your own thesis? Who breaks the model of cultural repetition? Who's doing something really fresh and unique now or recently?
Yeah, I mean, I will give you a couple examples, but at the same time, my point is, and I try to be really optimistic that I think...
Other than geese, which you've mentioned twice on the show. You
mentioned twice already, which is the most stereotypical, like, of course you like geese. But the point is that there's interesting things going on. It's just, is that getting uplifted into the center of the market the way that happened in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s? Okay. So I would say... Nathan Fielder's The Rehearsal.
Oh, hell yeah.
It's
Hell
so
yeah.
incredible.
I'm so glad you mentioned Nathan Fielder. I hadn't even thought of that, but he's nailing it.
Yeah. So Nathan Fielder, Nathan was great.
Yeah.
Nathan For You is great, but it's just, I mean, it's a comedy show. It was a very clever comedy show, but it's a comedy show. The Rehearsal takes a comedic bend on the reality show and then instantly twist it into be a kind of a meta commentary on the world that we live in and art itself and reality TV itself, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, just unbelievably layered, brilliant, surprising, funny, finding new forms of humor where there really shouldn't be humor at all. I mean, and even having to point out there's been no laughs in this episode for the last, 30 minutes or whatever. Just really incredible. And so I think that the thing that worries me about The Rehearsal, on the other hand, is that yes, when it came out, people were like, wow, that was incredible. A lot of accolades. But no, are people still talking about it? Is it inspiring another group of young people to be like, that's what I should be doing with my cultural time? The way that when I, again, saw Twin Peaks when I was a kid, it was on TV, it was crazy. It was part of my identity. I had a Twin Peaks t-shirt. I went and watched all the other David Lynch films, and I wanted to be a filmmaker, and so much of it was inspired by the weirdness of David Lynch. And so is Nathan Fielder doing that? And so to me, that is the thesis of the book, that you can have a Nathan Fielder who can take the opportunity and do something incredible with it.
I think
is that cascading through the
I think it is. We live in a noisier world than we did when Twin Peaks
Yes.
came out, but I do actually think that people are looking at Nathan Fielder and saying, that's what new looks like. That's what good looks like. And I think
I'll
they're
give you an
being
example
inspired.
of where that probably did happen, which is The Chair Company, which I don't know if you've seen on HBO, but it's Tim Robinson and Zach Cannon's new show. So they did I Think You Should Leave for Netflix and
Yep.
The Detroiters, which are all great and funny. But The Chair Company is like a pastiche suspense drama. And it obviously just has a very... I think The Rehearsal opened the door for them to do the show. It's different. It's not a ripoff of The Rehearsal by any means. But it's a really strange hyper extension of American malaise and ugliness and conspiratorial thinking. And they did a really great job with the first season. And so I recommend also, if people want to see a kind of post Nathan Fielder comedy world, that's a great example.
Excellent. The two examples that I came up with, I mean, there's a lot out there, but was Lin-Manuel Miranda. And you could argue that, well, it is cultural repetition if you take a Broadway play and a hip opera, if you will. But I mean, plus his level of creative verve and artistic verve, and just the specificity and brilliance of Hamilton, I'm just blown away by. I thought that was very special.
I think what's interesting, and this is kind of the thing that would be up for debate, is the degree to which it so represented the moment, and then it became a avatar of liberal cringe. And it, to me, is I think this idea of liberal cringe is one of a massive problem that the professional class needs to get over, which is the professional class hates being the professional class. And so anytime they're overly associated with works of art that they themselves love and that represents their values, they just have this weird, like, oh, that's not me. I don't want to be associated with it. And so I think he suffered from Trump's victory kind of, he provided a vision of that we all thought was like, this is what America is.
Right.
And this is what America will be.
Interesting.
And then when Trump won, it was like, oh, see, that was the liberal delusion that we've all been living in. And so it will forever stand as a historical marker of a certain way of thinking. And the art itself obviously has to be at a certain level to achieve that.
I hear what you're saying.
The history has definitely made it complicated.
Yeah. You're very good at finding the
downside.
whatever the opposite of the silver lining is on the things that I love. The other thing I think is a force for good here and very anti-Poptimism is Rick Rubin. And Rick Rubin, with his book, The Creative Act, and his repetition about how the audience doesn't matter, that your creative work is a diary entry, and he has podcasts that are like 2 to 4 hours long And he's present on social media, right? Like for a long time, and I don't know if they still are, but like Monocle magazine never had a Twitter account. They weren't on Instagram. Monocle was like, we don't play that game because we don't want to fall into this rat race of the internet incentives. It was almost that Buddhist withdrawal that you described earlier. Rick Rubin is like, he's got this well-crafted presence on Twitter, a well-crafted presence on Instagram, but he's not doing it for the likes, right? And so I think that the people that he celebrates, he's clearly not putting in his podcast roster the people that are the flavor of the month, right? Quite the opposite. He just interviewed Woody Allen. And he's not putting the people on there that have the most views on social media. So I see him as a countervailing force to Poptimism, ironically, since he broke many of what are now the biggest pop music acts in the world.
I mean, so one of the challenges also of the 21st century, and this is not trying to find the bronze lining or whatever we're going to call it. But
the rusty lining.
The great films of the 21st century. Mulholland Drive, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Inglourious Bastards, The Phantom Thread, whatever these are. These are all 90s auteurs. And Rick Rubin is an 80s, 90s auteur. And,
that's
and
right.
maybe, in the
who
sense
is still relevant. And so is Tarantino. No.
Yeah, totally. And so the
I
question
see what you mean.
is...
He's like, who's the 22-year-old Rick Rubin?
Yeah. Exactly. So the question I have, and I think the work that has to be done in a sense that this is not just inherent in a cultural system, is that you have a bunch of people who came out of the 20th century who had an artistic mindset. And so the things that we're going to do, we're going to always push boundaries, and they were going to help artists push boundaries, et cetera, et cetera. The problem in the 21st century, if you've grown up in the 21st century, there is no access to that mindset ambiently. That if you just live in the environment, you're just never absorbing the ideals that a Rick Rubin or these people have. What Tarantino wants to do, what he wants to say something about film. Tarantino, ultimately, all his films are about films. And I don't think if you came up on TikTok, you're like, I want to say something about film. I want to say something about the history of visual media. It's just not kind of where things point to. And so it is our responsibility to teach the young people, because I believe the children are the future, that we need to make sure they know. They need to know that there's this thing called the artistic mindset, and this is what these values were. But if you do not encourage or teach that entire way of thinking, then no one will have it. Like, it's just
you just nailed it. You just nailed it. Because my son is already asking me about YouTube views.
Yeah,
that's what he's asking about.
And he's 1.5.
Well, he's 8. He's 8, okay. but still, right? It's when I was 8, I was watching rental VHS videos, and I was super interested in the story itself. I didn't care how many other people saw it.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. Yeah. And it wasn't quantified. So last question before we get to our quick fire. This book is really easy to read. You're a very good writer in this book. I have to say it's better than your other 2 books. I don't know if you feel good about that or not, but it's your best book.
I'll take it.
It's also incredibly dense. Uh-huh. It has hundreds of pages of references. So when I finished the book on Kindle, it was at 30% of the total book. So 70% of the book is references after the book itself. Let's talk about your writing process. What's your process? How did you weave it all together? I mean, it's like a beautiful mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's a couple of things. I mean, the number one is I actually am interested in all these things, and I almost very little in the book would I say I didn't experience in real time. There was a couple of things like Glee. I had never seen an episode of Glee, but I knew that Glee was a big deal. I know that it's referenced, and that, okay, so I can go back and watch Glee. So I watched Glee. I more obsessively listened to the Vampire Weekend albums. I had heard them ambiently before. But, so I went back and enjoyed things, but I know who Vampire Weekend is. I know that it's important. So I think almost everything in the book, for better, for worse, were things that I just have in my head. And then the process is, okay, so what are you going to write about? And my structure, my process, and the reason I love writing books instead of writing just like a collection of essays or something, is because I want it to all be tied together within a structure. And the way I think about this whole process is it is like architecture, in that you're building this outline and this structure, and you've got to build the first floor before you can build the second floor. But it also, when you take a step back, it holistically has to be a beautiful building. And so I'm constantly thinking about the micro and the macro and how they link up. And that's also how I think about society, which is that you're talking about these macro trends, but you've got to be able to explain it individually. That Kanye did this thing, and now the culture has this, and what the chain of reaction is that gets you there. So my process is that I tend to have a general sense of what I want to do, and then I think through what the chapters will be, and then I just start reading a lot, and I have outlines and the outlines are gigantic, and for the last book, the outline was, I think there was 90 pages of just outline for the book. And what I would do is just say, it starts with one chapter, it's going to have 3 parts, and then I'll slot in what I think is in there, and then I'll have a bullet point for each paragraph, and then as I get information, I slot it in there. And then if I add a new paragraph, I slot that in there. And so I'm going back and forth from the outline. And the most important thing also in this, and I wrote this all in 11 months, so it was also kind of a speed run, and that just required always knowing as soon as I open my computer in the morning, I know exactly what I'm going to write, because I've got all the information I need ready. And so it's the writing is researching and organizing that information, jumping in and writing a terrible first paragraph version of it, and then trying to finish a whole chapter that's terrible, and then going back and really shaping it. And then I turned in a book that was 110,000 words, or 100,000. It was too long and a little draggy. And then my editor did a really good job of just cutting out anything extra that didn't need to be there. Viking.
Great.
So shout out to Ibram for the work he did.
Incredible creative process. I commend your organization. So let's move to at large and off the cuff, our quick fire round. And ironically, we ask everyone the same question to start, which is, are you glad that social media exists, or do you wish it never existed?
Net positive.
Great. Okay. What's something that you heard or saw recently that made you go, okay, that's new?
I read, and I have not read the whole book, but Honor Levy, the young writer, has a short story called Love Story that is very controversial, and there are definitely people who don't like it. I thought it was brilliant in that it uses the incredible depth of internet slang to tell this story
I can't wait to read this. I love internet
boy
slang.
And girl. And it's so depressing. It's like one of the most hauntingly depressing things I've ever written, because it to me shows the degree to which the internet and this slang used to bring people together in a sense. And this whole book is like people who are just like the stories are incredibly atomized by living in this dense linguistic ecosystem that is the internet, and the way of thinking, and the way and everyone's cooked. I mean, it's basically the easy way to be like, oh, it's just a thing about how everyone's cooked. But I really appreciate just the idea that it used the medium of the moment to talk about the moment, and that, and in general, the kind of art I like does that.
Yeah, love that. Who's the most misunderstood cultural figure of the last 25 years?
This is like kind of a counterintuitive answer. Paris Hilton. Because she has re-wrangled her narrative to be like she was the original girl boss.
Yep. That's right.
That she's a musician, incredible song called Stars Are Blind. So the new take on Paris Hilton is that like she was misunderstood, but I think that is a misunderstanding.
I love that answer. Really, really good answer.
Which is that if you go back, read her memoir, everyone should be forced to read her memoir, because the degree to which that the entire book is making herself out to be a victim. And that the whole book is to justify all of her bad behavior. But at the end of the day, she from the very beginning was, and she's, obviously this, heiress is kind of the wrong word, but really, really wealthy, privileged woman. And her entire book is, I have to be rich and I have to be a tastemaker. But she has no taste. I don't think even her defenders would say she is a tasteful person. But the degree to which that she has crafted this now positive narrative, but I think when you read her own words, you can most certainly see there's still a lot of negativity and negative things behind it.
Someone's coming to Tokyo, and they're like, David, what should I do? What are you recommending? What are your favorite spots?
Yeah, the main thing I recommend at this point always is really don't worry about destinations in terms of I need to hit this museum or go to this specific place, unless there's a couple that you're dying to go to. The entire joy of Tokyo is just picking a neighborhood every day and walking around. So go to Nihonbashi, walk through Ningyocho or something. The other thing I would say is that every neighborhood you've heard of, Ginza, Shinjuku, Shibuya, Harajuku, just has too many tourists at this point.
It's crazy.
And so
it's crazy now. Because I used to live there in 2008 and 2009.
Okay.
I know you live there now. And I went back this year, and I was blown away about how many tourists there were. I used to be a freak in 2008. Yeah. You moved there way before.
Yeah.
But it is, and I tell people don't go to Kyoto.
Yeah, me too.
That's crazy, right? Because it's like, everyone's like, well, we're going to Tokyo, we're going to Kyoto. And I'm like, this is going to sound blasphemous. Skip Kyoto.
Yes.
It is so overrun by tourists that it sucks the interestingness out of walking around, right? Or even going to these different sites. And so get out there to, go to towns that nobody's heard of, go to little onsen villages, get out there in the countryside is what I say.
There's still many, many places in Japan that there are no tourists and you will enjoy. And look, my thing is not to be super anti-tourist. It's just that it does change.
It changes the experience.
If there's a cafe that only has 15 seats and it's on TikTok, well, obviously you're not going to ever go there again. It's not because I don't want to be with those people. It's like you can't get in. I'm not going to wait 2 hours to go to the cafe I used to be able to walk into. So it's hard. When I make this point, people in the comments, because the comments are the worst place on earth, are just always like, oh, you horrible snob, you must hate people from Asia because you don't like tourists. It's like, I'm not saying that people shouldn't go to Japan. It's just that it does change the lived experience of being in Tokyo. The thing of Tokyo, though, and you don't understand it until you get here, it's so big. It's such a big city that there's never a question of you can't go to places. Just don't go to Shibuya, but you can go to Daikanyama and probably be fine.
Yeah. Oh, God bless Daikanyama. And then we ask everyone the same finishing question, which is to walk us through one good recipe that you like to cook in enough detail that someone could recreate it at home. What are you making?
The thing I've been obsessed with, which I never really ate growing up, is braised either turnip greens or kale and collards if I can get them. And I am obsessed with cooking Southern food because I'm from the South and I can't get it in Japan. And so that started with buttermilk biscuits and ribs and pulled pork and all these things I thought were impossible for me to make. And I figured out how to make all of them. And so I had the whole everything. And the last thing was collard greens. And it's because they don't grow collard greens in Japan. Now, I went to a Nepalese little market once in Shinokubo, and I walked in and I was like, these are collards. And I was like, these are collards. And the guy's like, yeah, they're great, right? I was like, where do these come from? And he didn't know. And so like someone's growing collard greens, but they're just not available normally. But I realized that very broadleaf kale, like the non-curly kale, but the big leaf kale, or I can buy turnips and just cut the greens off. Those work really, really well. So the recipe, it'd be good to have like a Staub, like
cast iron, Dutch oven.
So a little olive oil, some nice crispy bacon, raw bacon and onion, grill that up or whatever. Saute, thank you. So you can tell which one of us works in food. So saute it, add in a little bit of raw garlic at the end, and then you break up the the leaves of the kale, put it in there, cover it with chicken stock, some bay leaves, celery salt, a little bit of red pepper. Cook that for about an hour. At the end, put some apple cider vinegar in there, 2 tablespoons. And then it's just fantastic. And I think that it's obviously like really healthy and a great way to get greens, but it's just a flavor that, as a kid, I mean, I probably wouldn't have liked it that much, but like a really, really good deep collard greens. It's one of those things where if you haven't had it in a while or you've never had it, you're going to be wowed by it.
David, it was phenomenal having you on the show. We love the book, and I want everyone to read it. And if they don't read it, I hope this episode tells a great story about it. So thank you and congratulations.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to At Large. Our theme song is Son of Sanford by Motion Worker. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and by email at atlargeshow.com. Follow me at SWH Norton on Instagram and Twitter, and DM me about the guests you want to hear on the show.